Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to cover something relatively important, molecules and bonds. As we see here, the goal is to understand ionic and covalent compounds as well as understand the law of multiple proportions. These two topics will be recurring, so it's important to get these down. Now before we get into bonds, it's important to learn the difference between an atom and a molecule. This will set the precedent for bonds. So let's get into it. An atom is the smallest piece of matter that is a specific element. Molecules, on the other hand, is a group of atoms that are bonded together. The bond is important because molecules behave collectively as opposed from the individual properties of atoms. Now, the concept of basically bonding is to create molecules. Bonds are the glue that holds the complex molecules together. Now you'll need to know two main bonds for Gen Chem. We won't go too in depth with this video, but the names are covalent and ionic bonds. Starting with ionic bonds have a simple definition. Bonds formed between ions. To understand what ionic bonds are, obviously you need to know what an ion is. Now the concept of an ion relates to the imbalance of charge. If it has a non-zero charge, it is an ion. Now, there are two types of ions. One's a positive ion, where it has more protons than electrons, and this is called a cation. And the other one is a negative ion, where there's more electrons than protons, and this is called an anion. And charge, of course, is the difference between protons and electrons. Now, let's look at an example. Lithium. Lithium by itself is not an ion. However, if I were to lose an electron making it, Li, then it becomes a cation. Conversely, iodine by itself is not an ion, but if I were to make it gain an electron, making it I minus, it becomes an anion. Now, there's also an alternative concept of polyatomic ions. These are simply ions that have many atoms. Of course, you'll need to know them and perhaps memorize a few, but this is the basic idea. Now, coming back to bonds, ionic bonds are essentially bonds with charged elements. The goal of an ionic bond is to make the charge zero. So typically an ionic bond is between an ion and a cation. We'll go how to calculate charges of different anions and cations in a different video. So all you need to know is ionic bonds exist. Now the other type of bond is the covalent bond. These, instead of being ions, refer to the sharing of electrons through bonding. Now this is based on a complex concept called octet rule. We'll cover that much later as well as the specifics of bonding in general, but use this as a cheat way of remembering. Ionic bonds are between cations and anions, covalent bonds are between anions. And by the way, hydrogen will be an anion in this case, not a cation, even though it has a +1 charge. Okay, so those are the bonds. It's going to seem pretty abstract, but after learning about the periodic table, which is the next video, it should all start to come together. Now the other part is to cover the law of multiple proportions, and this is a pretty simple topic. Atoms combine as whole numbers, and in other words, you can never have a fraction of a molecule or an atom. So hypothetically, if you were to grab a bag of air, there will always be a whole number amount of molecules and atoms, never a partial. And this all makes sense because an atom is the smallest unit of matter, and anything smaller is simply subatomic, as covered in the last video. Anyways, that's all you need to know for this part. Take care and bye.